Welcome to Bat Lessons, the Batman History Podcast. I'm Brian.
And I'm Alex.
And on this long promised episode of Bat Lessons, we discuss Batman's first foray onto the silver screen.
That's right. I've been dreading it, to be honest with you. I think we promised this on like the second or third episode that we were going to come back and we were going to talk about the movie. Mm-hmm. I shouldn't call it a movie. We'll talk about it more in a minute. But you know, it's a lot like the Spring Hill Jack episode, where I just wasn't sure how it was going to work. You know, there's so much history and so much context, and you know, the research is just daunting. You know, mm-hmm. But I'm excited to talk about it. How about you?
Yeah. I'm super. I've been interested in this for a long time. I really appreciate, or I shouldn't say appreciate. I'm really interested in like controversial topics and like kind of diving into those. And I remember the first time you said, "Yeah, you should check this out." It was over a year ago for sure. I was in a different house.
Probably 2 years ago, because that's about when we started the podcast.
And I remember watching a bunch of this and being like, "Oh wow, this is pretty tough."
Yeah.
And then like from then on we were like, maybe next time. Maybe.
Well, I definitely, want to do topics that are sensitive of justice, but it's also just like so for example, like World War II buffs, like are a thing. Mm-hmm. They exist. Like people
totally
know their stuff and I do not, right? And so I don't want to like get something wrong or like say something that is going to get me judged or whatever. So, I've done my best and we're going to punt on a few things, but let's do it. So serials, we've talked a little bit about serials before. Mm-hmm. Do you have like a top level summary? Like what is it in your mind when you think serial, like a film serial?
Actually, one of the very first things I think of is the Serial podcast. And that was not, and a lot of people thought like serial killer serial, and it's not that. It was an episodic, comes out like every week or every day or something like that to tell a story. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of my framing around serial and what that means in terms of like serials is it something episodic that tells a story over a number of episodes.
I think that's good, right? People often make the mistake, and we did this on earlier episodes, of comparing serials to movies. And I think the reason they do that, right, is because they happen in movie theaters, right? So if you're thinking about what the physical experience of viewing a serial is, you're thinking of one that's like a movie theater, and we have that today. Like, you don't have to come up with something analogous. We have it. And so that's the closest thing. But I think if we have a closer relative to serials, it's actually television.
Right.
We'll talk about that more in a second, but serials actually come first. They come before feature-length movies by a few years. They show up around 1912, and that's because the technology of the time, the reason that we have them instead of movies. In the 1910s, silent films standardized on 35 millimeter, which is the frame size for the film, at 18 frames per second. And a single reel of film at that time at 18 frames per second was about 15 minutes, right? So that's all theaters were set up to show was a single reel. They didn't have the technology. They didn't have the sort of like skills and training to be able to do more. So you couldn't do a full story, right? You couldn't get to know characters in that time, especially because if you think about it, these are silent serials or silent films. So a significant portion of your runtime is like cutting to title cards and back, right? If you have dialogue at all, right? Mm-hmm. Because everything that people are saying, you have to read. And so imagine like taking 30% of that runtime off the top. So you've only got like 10 minutes to do everything.
Yeah.
Including, credits and anything that you want to have. Really, it was kind of the only option was to, if you wanted to tell a bigger story or you wanted people to get to know characters, you had something that was more than a novelty. You had to do serial fiction. And, there is precedent, right? Serial newspapers, serial fiction is showing up in newspapers and magazines. We have the format, and it does all the same stuff, right? We have recaps at the beginning. We have cliffhangers at the end. Mm-hmm. It's like a well-understood format. So they're just doing exactly what they'd been doing in writing, but now they're doing it, on the silver screen.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. There's a whole bunch of formats that really the type of art that goes into it is limited by the medium, right? So yeah. So like I'm old enough to remember when you had to when you watched I don't know, like Titanic, it was 2 VHSs,
Yes,
or
I remember that too.
Some people had to flip laser discs. We never had one of those. So I've seen Reddit posts where people talk about the scene right before they flip the disc on Star Wars. and they always remember Getting Up. Or like records, I've recently got a turntable, and I have like a new appreciation for like how albums are created, because they really have like a first half and a second half.
Yeah, A-side,
because
B-side.
you have to flip the record. But like even just like the storytelling, the arc of the music. Like I always go to Abbey Road, where like the final song on side A is "I Want You," and it's got this like heavy like ba 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 ba, it's like really heavy and it's static, and then it cuts, and that's the end of the record, and then you flip it over, and it's "Here Comes the Sun," bling ding 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 ding, like it's a huge tone shift, and you don't get that when you listen to it on the CD or when you listen to it in Apple Music, because it's all consistent, right?
And so, not to be too nerdy, but the way that the audio is mastered actually takes into account where it is on the disc.
Yeah.
The resolution of the audio changes, and the dynamic range that's possible changes.
Yes.
So like you will have songs that are better to be quiet and loud at the beginning of the side versus the end of the side, because yes, because it's not possible based on where it is on the disc.
It's physics. I love it.
Yeah,
That's
it's pretty wild. So but the technology actually moved really, really quickly. So, they did serials because they had to. Well, by 1916, so just a couple years later, right? Feature-length movies are already more popular. They don't just exist. It's like the format. It's more like a stage play. It's more like a musical. It's more like an opera. So when you think about like going out on a date or like, for a night of entertainment, people are coming for, one or two long form pieces of entertainment. They're not connected to anything else. It's not serial storytelling. It's exactly like you think of at a movie theater today. But movie theaters are trying to be an attraction, right? They want to get people to come more often. They want people to stay longer, right? And so they come up with all kinds of value adds, right, to get butts and seats. And part of the way they do that is like newsreels, right? So that this is like the first time ever people are seeing moving pictures of like actual events that are happening out in the world, with cartoons and with serials. So they might serve a similar purpose to like a trailer would today, where you have like a reel that goes beforehand, a newsreel, and then maybe you have a serial afterwards, right? But there's also something that emerges, which is a matinee. And a matinee is like usually on a weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They'll have like a special event where they advertise in advance that it's like ticketed, and you can come and you can be at the theater for like 4 or 6 hours, right? And you can watch like a ton of serials or a ton of cartoons, newsreel, a movie, maybe two. Yeah, it's an excuse for someone to come and spend a lot of time there. They even would have them targeted at different types of people, right? So they had what they might call like a kiddie matinee, where it was like all kids-oriented stuff. And like people could like let their kids go and spend the day at the theater and entertain themselves. So, even as feature-length films become more popular, which is almost immediately, as soon as the technology is available, it becomes more popular. The studios who own the theaters at this time, right, are trying to, monetize it all the time, so someone's not coming for a date night. Well, maybe they'll come watch cartoons all morning. And so serials stick around for quite a while, even as they're not the most popular. But by the 1950s and 60s, people start adopting television, and that's when it's all over. Because in my opinion, TV is basically the same stuff. So like people talking about like every time if you search like Batman 1943 on YouTube, people talk about, did you know that there was a Batman movie? And it's like really not the case. This is a Batman television show. If you're going to compare it to something, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So when we were recording, we paused for a second, and when we came back, we noticed in the edit that Alex's audio didn't sound quite as good. We've done what we can to clean it up. It's better than it was, certainly. But it's not quite perfect yet, and we'll make sure we fix it so it doesn't happen again next time. But if it really drives you nuts, you can speed up your audio just a little bit, playback just a little faster, and it sounds better. But sorry about that, and back to the show.
You might have some frame of references for like current pop culture, though, that might, clue you into some of the things that are happening in serials at the time. George Lucas, famously, very into serials.
This George who?
Yeah, the Star Wars guy was really, really into serials. Indiana Jones as well. He's homaging a lot of the stuff that he saw in serials. The wipes. So a lot of his edits, he would, when he's doing, interscene cuts, they're just hard cuts, right? or interesting inside the same scene, when he's cutting from one character to the other, he's doing hard cuts. But if he's going to go to like a different place and he's going to do a new establishing shot, it's very common for him to wipe like left to right or bottom to top, or like, and that's something that was really, really common at this time. If you watch the Batman serial, you'll see they do like spiral wipes, which I thought was really interesting. And just the sort of the villains and the peril and the tropes of like, for example, Indiana Jones sort of being scared of snakes, and there's like a snake pit that he has to dive into, right? Like it's very much 007 might be a similar place where you're getting some of these tropes. In the Batman serial, there's like a pit full of ravenous alligators, that is like where this stuff comes from.
Man, you're really making me think about how there's like some really great parodies out there. Like Austin Powers is like an incredible parody of the early Bond films, or Robin Hood Men in Tights. It's really quick, like 18 months later or something.
Yeah,
like shot for shot parody of Robin Hood Prince of Thieves. This would make a great parody. I would love to see like the Batman serials parody.
Sure. The thing is that like people don't really remember, right? It's at this point the people who went to serials are all like very old or dying, so it would be lost on people. And a lot of the filmmakers who would go on and make the films of our childhood, or people in our audience when they were young, revere this stuff because it was so special to them. So it's not the case that it's getting lampooned; it's getting homaged, right?
Right.
So you a lot of respect and reverence for it, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, they really wanted it to be an experience for you. They had all kinds of things that were, trying to get you to come in. I talked about the matinees, right? There was sort of a famous sort of like, I don't know, phenomenon where they had what they called dish nights at movie theaters, where if you came to watch a movie, they would give you like a dish, like a
plate or something,
like a fancy plate, for dinner, and you would go once a week or once a month, to get your dish on dish night until you built your set of free dishes.
That's really fun.
Yeah, they had cry rooms for kids who wanted to bring babies. They had uniformed ushers that would wear, you've probably seen, people in these get-ups with the buttons and the top hats, right? And
yeah, totally. In movies,
it was a formal event. You would wear suits and ties. People would wear hats. You would remove your hat, place it in your lap. No cup holders, right? So you're not eating or drinking inside the theater, but you did have ashtrays. People were smoking inside the theaters. Yeah.
So if you sit in the back, you can't see the screen because everyone's smoking at that time, right?
Yeah. Double features were a thing where you'd go and you'd see two movies in a row.
Dang.
And the reason for that, right, is because all of these things are designed, right, to get you to... there's something that you really, really want, and they're subsidizing something you want less by getting you to buy both, right? So this is like the cable bundle, where really all you care about is like, Comedy Central and HGTV, but they're going to sell you CNN, right? You get the whole bundle, right?
I see what you're
saying. So you're coming for the double feature. They've got the movie that everyone wants to see first, and then there's a movie that maybe some people want to see second. And that's where the phrase B movie comes from, because there's the A movie, and then there's the B movie. No kidding.
It's like the B sides on records and stuff too. That's so interesting. Okay.
And so when they were shooting movies, they knew that it was going to be packaged. So they would have a movie that they would shoot that was the big attraction with all the best actors and the big budget, and then they'd have another movie that they were going to package with it. They'd advertise them together. They'd go to the theater together. That was cheaper to make, right? But they could sell the ticket even though you didn't really want to see it. It was the B movie in the double feature, the A movie and the B movie.
They did this in like Walmart $5 DVDs too, like they did.
Yes, they did.
Where they were like tricking you into buying crappy movies because you wanted the good one.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really funny.
And a lot of things that they continue to evolve amenities. Like today, they have the fancy reclining chairs and the food that they bring out to you. It's if you go to an Alamo Draft House, they've got the food ninjas, right? Mm-hmm. At the time, a big deal was air conditioning, right? So like before people were having air conditioning in their homes, they might go to the movie theater to like get out of the heat, and that was like an amenity that was like a big deal, and they would advertise on it. There's like ads you can see.
Yes, you lucky people, just sit back for a moment, relax, and notice the delightfully clean, cool, and refreshing atmosphere of this scientifically air-conditioned theater. Great, isn't it? Remember, you can enjoy great motion picture entertainment all summer long in cool comfort at this theater.
Drive-ins were a similar thing where it's kind of a gimmick that they're trying to, like, I don't know, give you some privacy, you know, have it be more comfortable potentially, right? And just another excuse to get into the theaters. So
yeah, and that totally makes sense. I mean, that like there's a number of different things where they've done that where it's like, come here to experience the thing and then spend money on us. Like malls,
yes.
like a big thing in malls was
Totally.
like the doors close and like in the Midwest in the winter you go here and it's warm.
Yeah.
You know, or like it's hot outside, you come here and it's cool.
Yeah. So it's a really fascinating time. I'll tell you, it's actually kind of hard to do research about. Like, serials are kind of lost to time for whatever reason. There's not a lot of like academic work. The best book I found was called Continued Next Week, and it's from the 60s, and it's not been reprinted. Like, it's old and beat up, and it's like people don't write about it. And there's not a lot of like documentaries. There's not a lot of like, you know, stuff out there. It's a really interesting period in pop culture history that we don't talk about much.
You're an animal. You just voraciously eat up books. It's so crazy to me.
I didn't read the whole thing. I was doing research. I would just tell you I was super nervous about doing this episode because, like, am I going to cover this topic well?
Yeah, no, I get that. I think it's so interesting that you're like, I need to do research and I'm going to buy a book. Like, it doesn't even cross my mind to buy a book. It was like, whatever's on the internet, I'm just going to use that.
Well, that's the thing, right? Is the internet shows up like in the late 90s, and you know who's going to go write a bunch of stuff that happened in like the 1910s? Like, those people aren't using the internet, right?
Yeah.
So you got to go to books for a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, I did look up like the Batman serials on YouTube, and all I found was the actual Batman serials. I didn't find anyone talking about it.
There's a couple videos, but you know,
I mean, relatively, it's like it's a thin topic, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of like wanting to be well researched, very quickly, I'm going to talk about what we're not going to talk about, like stuff I'm punting on, because like these are things I tried to prep for, and I'm just not. Like part of the reason the episode took so long is because I'm terrified about talking about World War II. Right? We're a history podcast. I want to get that sort of thing right. I'm probably not the right person. There's a lot of people out there who are buffs. They know their stuff. I don't. Yeah. Right? If you know someone who's an expert, let us know. I'd love to arrange an interview. We could do a bonus episode.
I totally thought you were going to say something else. I thought you were like, if you know someone, listen to their podcast.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, real talk, honestly. So we're just not. Yeah. The thing that you do have to understand for the Batman serials to make sense is 1943, when the Batman serial occurs, is 2 years after our involvement into World War II. So we're participating on the war. In the war on two fronts. One is in Europe and the other is in the Pacific with Japan, right? And the movie primarily deals with Japan, right? Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, and that's what formally pulled us into the Second World War. It's worth noting that we're actually pretty involved with the war before this happens. We're sending money and supplies to allies, and actually we're even using our Navy to escort British ships, and you know, they have orders to like shoot German ships on sight. So like we're like days, not weeks away from entering the war when Japan hits us. So, you know, FDR, who's the president at the time, really, really wanted us in World War II. And Pearl Harbor is kind of the excuse. It's the nice reason for us to be able to be in it. It changes the tide on popular opinion. The public really didn't want to be in a war. And so that's what pulls us in.
Yeah.
Shortly after Pearl Harbor, the U.S. began a practice of what is most frequently called Japanese internment. At the time, it was called Japanese relocation. Some people now are trying to, lead a movement to call it Japanese incarceration. And it's kind of a fraught topic. Around 127,000 Japanese Americans lived in the mainland United States at the time, and virtually all of them were forced to sell all of their belongings, including like any property that they had, houses and things like that. They were then rounded up and shipped to live in one of 10 camps across the United States, usually in a desert or a swamp, right? This is like undesirable land, wherever they were able to get it. And they lived for years, surrounded by barbed wire, under the watch of armed guards. The executive order that was used to create these camps wasn't rescinded until December of 1944. And most of the camps, it took a while to close. Most of them were closed by end of 1945, but there was one that even remained longer than that. And afterwards, the Japanese Americans that were allowed to leave didn't receive any sort of compensation or any sort of aid. Many of them ended up homeless or destitute, right? It was bad news bears, right? So the pretense of imprisoning people at the time is that they were suspected to be disloyal and that they couldn't be trusted, that they might sabotage the United States, that they might be committing espionage, which is like important context for the movie because that's like what the movie is about, what the serial is about. However, it's really important to understand. It's very clear that this is just racism. Like,
it's crazy racism.
Yeah. 2/3 of the people who were interned at these camps were natural born U.S. citizens, right? So they were second generation or later, full citizens of the United States. They had no due process. There was no hearing. There was no trial. They had committed no crime, right? There were no charges. And they've never known any other country, right? They've never lived anywhere else. The final third of those 2/3 were ineligible for naturalizing and becoming citizens due to national law at the time. If you were not white, you could not become a naturalized citizen of the United States at that time. That was encoded into law and actually upheld by the Supreme Court multiple times at the time. Wow. Yeah. So that's just one example of the racism that predates. But between 1869 and 1924, about 200,000 Japanese Americans immigrated to Hawaii alone. And then another 180,000 immigrated to the west coast of the United States. In 1924, there was a federal immigration act that essentially made it illegal for Japanese people to immigrate to America. So all the people who are here had been here for like 20 years at that point, right? Because that's the last time they were allowed to immigrate. Again, they were forced not to be, they were disallowed from immigrating because of racism, right? The rationalization at the time was that these immigrants were largely unskilled labor that were taking the jobs of citizens. Might sound familiar to some people.
Long pause.
Throwing that out there. Take that as you will. There was also fear of race mixing, right? So notably FDR, right, who was the one who signed the executive orders that made these camps, is on the record as far back as 1920, writing articles in magazines that's praising California laws that are banning Japanese people from owning land, opposing interracial marriage between Japanese and white citizens in the United States. So, basically people just didn't like Japanese people, and this was the excuse that they took. It's a pretty horrific period of history. It's absolutely a war crime, right? Like, one of the reasons you don't hear about it is the same reason you often don't hear about the genocide of Native American people, which is like there were 150 million people in the States, and by comparison, 120,000 is not many, right? So it's sort of easy to forget and to wipe under the rug because like there just weren't as many people impacted, and so it's like not visible, I'll drop a link in the show notes to a video from George Takei, who is an actor famous for appearing on Star Trek, talking about his experience growing up in an internment camp in the United States. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that before we move on.
You've basically covered it really well. Terrible, a lot of awful racist elements and rules around that. One little tidbit that I think is kind of a fun fact is, do you know what the executive order number was for the Japanese internment?
I don't. Was it 66 or something like that?
9066. And that's where the Star Wars Order 66 came from. It's a reference.
Wow, I didn't know that. Oh, yeah. That actually makes sense. Okay.
Because a whole bunch of the prequels was based around FDR's use of World War II to change the power of the executive branch. And
gotcha.
Change it from a republic to an empire. And that's what the prequels are about. And I know this is the Batman show, so we should jump back to Batman.
We should, and not talk about executive power grabs and people routing people of other races that may or may not be happening presently. Yeah, so the movie, Batman, 1943, the serial. I'm going to stop calling it a movie.
Serial,
I can't believe that. I had a whole section of this notes about...
It's not a movie, it's a serial.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the movie.
It was announced by Columbia in April 1942. So Columbia is the lady with the flame torch,
Yep. Looks like the Empire, or not the Empire, the Statue of Liberty, but it's not the Statue of Liberty.
Yes. They merged with TriStar in the 80s. They were bought by Sony in the 90s. So Sony owns the rights to this now, which is part of the reason why it's hard to come by. It was announced in 1942, about a year before it came out. And writing of the serial probably took place through the second half of 1942 into early 1943, and then they were probably shooting early 1943. It was written by three people, Victor McLeod, Leslie Swabacher, and Harry Fraser. I know basically nothing about them. It's hard to find a lot of detail. But it's really fascinating because, like we talked about on last episode, there are many elements of Batman that start here, right? They're actually coming up with stuff that is part of the Batman pantheon. One of which is the first appearance of the Batcave.
Just like in general, or just on the screen?
No, this is the first Batcave.
So there's no Batcave in the comics before this?
No.
Interesting. But you did say put a pin in the dailies. Did the dailies come before or after the serials?
No, after.
After,
yeah.
Okay.
And I had you describe a room. Do you remember what that looked like?
Yeah, because when I watched the serials, I was like, holy crap, that's exactly the same thing that Alex had me describe on the show.
It is the Batcave from the serial.
Yeah, so it's just a room with a desk in the middle where you sit, and there's this big cave behind you.
Mm-hmm. That logo behind the desk.
But the desk is right in the middle of the room.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what the Batcave looks like. Yes. It's like the second episode is when you see the Batcave.
It's called the Batcave, yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't call it the Batcave, they call it the Batcave, and that was the name of the episode. So this is like inventing big parts of the Pantheon, right? This is lore.
Yeah.
Unsubstantiated, like uncited. There was another video essayist who did a video about the serials who put forth that the reason that the Batcave exists is because it was an easy set to make.
Oh, that makes sense.
Literally, they were back solving from like, we need a place for him to interrogate people. We need a place for him to bring back, which is primarily what it serves as, right? That's where they tie dudes up to a chair inside the Batcave multiple times during the serial and leave them. Yeah.
There was a point where he left and he just like locked the doors. Yeah. And he just like left him in there.
Yeah.
Like now there'd be a huge security risk because you got a computer and stuff. But like then it was literally just like a desk and a chair. And bars on the windows.
Well, they entrapped one guy. The deal was that he was tied up to the chair, but he was tied loosely to let him get out. And then he was like searching around the room. He was locked in. He couldn't get out, but he found a phone and he dialed a number, and they had this fancy screen in the other room where they could see the numbers that he was dialing, and they intercepted the call and pretended to be the person and then called to find the location of the hideout. It was like kind of a cool, espionage.
Yeah. Man in the middle
sort
attack,
of like spy.
Right?
Yeah. event. But yeah, that theoretically, maybe, cover my ass here, but like the Batcave might exist simply because it's an easy set to have those sorts of things to occur.
Sure. I'm happy with that. I mean, it turned out really well for kind of a wild hair.
Likely also, this is where Alfred is created. Like we spoke about last episode, the first written record we have of Alfred is from a shooting script. So despite the fact that Alfred appears in a comic first, in terms of like when the general public can see it, in terms of like written records, physical materials, the script for the movie is where it comes first. And so it's likely that they created Alfred as a character to help them drive around, right? There is no Batmobile, right? So he's driving the car. He does help them a few times, right? He gets up in disguises and like does spy stuff with them. A lot of the stuff is spy stuff in the show.
Well, it's World War II. It's all spy stuff.
Yeah. What did you think of this, Alfred? Was it closer to what you expect, or?
Yes, it was closer to what I expect. The timeline is kind of interesting. I'd be curious to understand like when they were doing production for this versus like doing the art for the dailies, because I did read that a lot of Alfred in like the comics were based off of this actor. Though the dailies looked really different than this guy.
Take that, Alfred. Reverse it. So the comic book comes first, Batman. Okay. I think it's like, I can't remember the number. I'm not going to do it, but it's early in 1943. It's a portly man, kind of fat with a cul-de-sac, right? And that's in color. Then the movie comes in the summer, right? And the movie, it's a guy with a comb over who's skinny, right?
The serials.
Yes, the serials, not the movie. Thank you. The serial happens. Skinny guy, comb over. And then the daily strip, which is black and white, happens in the fall, matches the serial. Skinny guy, comb over.
So I'm misremembering that I was, we had read the book, the issue. Okay. I would also say that this Alfred looks just like someone in my head, like from a movie or something. Oh, wow. And I just cannot, I looked and I looked, I couldn't figure out who it was.
Put it in the comments.
Someday, who it is. If you know who it is, throw it in the comments. Write me a letter, whatever. Like, I want to know.
Carrier pigeon.
Looks just like him.
Yeah.
But if you look up a picture of this dude, doesn't look like that at all. Like, he looks pretty different on screen than he does in like photos.
So in terms of appearance, this guy is the person who like sets the tone for like who Alfred's going to be from then on. So like before, he looks a little bit different, and then very quickly everyone swaps over to looking like the guy in the movie. But in terms of the way he acts, his mannerisms and his role, right, is very clearly in the serial comic relief. He's kind of an idiot. He's kind of bumbling around, doesn't want to do things, kind of gets caught out. That very much matches the comics. So they're a united front. Like, doesn't matter if it's the daily strip, doesn't matter if it's the comic. If you're in 1943, you're talking about Alfred, he's a funny doofus. So that changes, right? That's not how he is today. What he does do in this that is similar today is that he's always helping Bruce and Batman. He's at home in the field. He's driving around. He's donning disguises. He's participating. He's an active role. He's not just some dude back at home. So do you want to talk a little bit about the story? I have like a very simple summary of the whole thing. I also could talk about the radium gun. I'm very excited to talk about the radium gun. Let's talk about the story first.
Let's talk about the story first, then we can get into the details. Yeah. So the very, very high level is basically like in the very beginning of the very first episode, like you learn that like Batman or Bruce Wayne is actually Batman, and Bruce Wayne is this like playboy who is like, he's got this girlfriend. He's like trying
They're engaged. Yeah.
So engaged. Okay.
He's engaged to Linda Page.
Terrible boyfriend or fiance. Awful. Just throughout the whole show. Terrible.
Actively being a dick.
Yeah, incredibly so. And so they build up this idea that he's got like these two personalities, and Dick Grayson's always with him. Or is it Dick Grayson? Yeah, Dick Grayson.
Yeah, it is.
Is always with him. And he makes this comment, like Dick Grayson's like, "Hey, Bruce, why don't you just make it easy on yourself and tell her who you really are?" And he's like, "Well, I can't do that, especially because I have these new orders from Uncle Sam to help with the war effort." And so suddenly you're like formatted into this setup that he is kind of like espionage for the U.S. troops.
He's working on the home front
government. And so then you're quickly interact with some bad guys, and they say, "Oh, Dr. Daka isn't going to like this." And he's like, "Who is that?" And they're like, "Shut up." And so then like now like there's this Dr. Daka, and then the audience, you're introduced to Dr. Daka, who is this Japanese guy. I think he's a prince, and he is deep spy for Japanese. And he's got this
constantly talking about Emperor Hirohito, and the Rising Sun's gonna smash America and destroy it.
And at some point we need to talk about the makeup, because it is very rough.
We will. I have a note about it.
I pulled up a couple of screenshots so that you can like see it. But like, so they're trying to get a big store of radium for this radium gun, so that they can get access to all this stuff and
they allude to the fact that they could make it into a larger weapon as well. It's not just necessarily a handheld gun.
And then they can win the war. So this is like high stakes, classic Batman. And then through like a very convoluted like back and forth like traps and counter traps and like escapes and fights, they finally meet up with Dr. Daka. They foil his plan.
Well, each episode, right, is Daka trying to get more radium to like destroy the United States, and like Bruce and Batman, or Batman and Dick, Batman and Robin, foiling him in various ways. So it's like they're gonna get radium from this place, foiled. Get radium from this place, foiled. Get radium, and that's it the whole time until the end. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. There's a couple of things that are kind of interesting in there. That Dr. Daka has a mind control device where he cracks
scrambles
into your
brains.
brain in a certain way that like he can talk into the special microphone, and those do whatever he says.
They call them zombies.
They call them zombies. And then another element that I thought was really interesting is that they run into Batman enough, and they think they kill him several times.
Yes.
To where Dr. Daka is like, maybe Batman isn't like a guy, but like a
multiple people
club. Yeah.
Yes.
And how many Batmans are there? So that's also kind of an interesting thing. But I think that's like my very high level of how it all works. And I'll hand it off to you to fill in what I missed.
I think that's pretty much it. I think the very first scheme that Daka uses to try to get radium is he's going to break into this place called the Gotham City Foundation, which is unclear to me exactly what they are, what they do. They employ some scientists, and Linda Page's uncle, Martin, works for the Gotham City Foundation, and so does she. She's like a secretary or front office person. Uncle Martin is the one handling the radium, and so they, in the first or second episode, kidnap Uncle Martin, and so that's the B plot.
I think it's the very first episode.
Okay, so the A plot is that Doc is trying to get the radium. Batman and Robin are stopping him. The B plot is Linda's uncle is kidnapped, and they're trying to get the uncle back, right? So that actually is one of the sort of like things that generates motion as well, is because like she gets leads on where he is, and then she chases after them, and Batman and Robin are having to like protect her without telling her, right? So that happens at various points. There's lots of science fiction. There's a lot of like spy espionage. It's as much James Bond as it is Batman. Like imagine, the scene in Bond where, there's the laser that's like going up the table between the legs and he's like strapped down. Like it's tons of stuff like that where they've got, alligators are in the floor. They've got the brainwashed people holding people back. Like it's like there's bombs here and smoke's there. And like there's one of the things they have this hideout, right? Where the goons are constantly showing up, and there's this button that they press, and then they put their hand on this panel, and they have a ring around their finger that has the number 5. And then Daka has an X-ray, so he can see the number 5 through the panel on the other side of the wall. And it's just this like, there's technology for no reason. Like they've created this, like we're observing that they've got X-rays, and that's so cool because that's like state of the art, cutting edge, and it's part of the espionage, right? All kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah. The monologuing thing you were talking about, they have a really funny moment. I always think of The Incredibles, by the way.
Yes.
Where he's like, "Oh, you got me monologuing." Yeah. And so there's this part at the very end where like Batman's caught and Dr. Daka is going to turn him into a zombie or kill him or something like that. And he's like, "But before I kill you, would you like to hear how I did it?" And it's just like, it's so ham-fisted. It really cracked me up in the moment.
That's something that has been lampooned, right? We do make fun of that now. But at this time, they were doing that in earnest, right? That is very, very much the sort of thing where, like, now we're going to explain it to the audience through you, Oh,
yeah. I mean, I think it probably comes from, I mean, it probably predates this, but, like, to me, it calls to mind, like, Agatha Christie. And how you have like a mystery novel, and at the end, someone always has to like explain all of the facts for it to make sense. And so, like, I think that's what this like ending monologue is really, is to like help connect the dots that maybe were subtler, throughout the story.
And it ends up exactly kind of how you think it would. Batman finds Daka's hideout. He reports it to the police. The police show up. They rescue Uncle Martin, and at the very end, like, Daka's like tied up or whatever, but he like breaks out and he has a knife and he holds it up to, Linda Page's back. And then, somehow Batman like pushes him into the pit of alligators. He gets eaten by the alligators. So he gets his just desserts,
Yeah. Actually, I think Alfred made that happen.
Is that who it was? I don't know. It happened really fast. It was kind of lame.
Yeah, it does happen really. It is pretty lame. But that last scene, so we've watched, hours of this show. They're like 15, 20 minutes. 15 episodes, and it's in the 15th episode that Batman and Daka meet for the first time. Yeah. Right. And so it's funny because like for 14 episodes, Batman has just been like, he's been fighting guys, but he's like
goons,
not been very racist. And then he meets Dr. Daka, and immediately he just drops a couple of slurs. Yeah. It's like, okay.
Yeah. Got it. In fact, there's a really, really ham-fisted, I think, attempt at being progressive, like 1940s progressive, where in like the 11th or 12th episode, towards the end, there is a gas station that's run by a Native American man. And you see when the goons drive past him, they call him like Sitting Bull, and they're like super racist and mean to him, right? And then later, Bruce and Dick and Alfred and Linda pull up in their car, and they buy some of the art that he's selling, and they're very respectful and they're very kind to him, but still racist. Like it's like very 1940s progressive, where clearly a white guy playing this in very broken English, and they're treating him like oh, you precious little, pat you on the head. Like it's very so. Yes, but the whole point, in my estimation, if I'm reading it correctly, is that they're trying to draw a distinction and a contrast between Bruce and the goons and their demeanor and the way that they treat them, and so it's actually trying to display virtue. So it's a little messed up, right? And there's racist undertones through all this. Anytime you run into a Japanese person in the show, a white person does, they will use slurs with them. In fact, the hideout is fascinating. I'm torn on this, right? Because like a lot of people, the take out here with the serial on the internet and with anyone talking about it is that it's bad, right? And And I hesitate to sing the praises because it is racist and it is problematic and it is of the time. But there are elements that are enjoyable, right? And it's hard because it's bound up in that stuff. Because so their hideout is in Japantown, and it's this like dark ride. So the idea is that like between these storefronts, you walk up, it's like this open face. It's like almost like you're at like Disneyland. There's a barker out there like trying to promote it. Come, step right up. Let's come see it, and there's a little podium, and I assume where you're, charging the fee. And then they go on these little cars. They get in like a little train ride, and then pushes them around, and it's a dark ride. They're going from scene to scene where it's Japanese people who have, captured American soldiers, and they're like, dressed like savages and stuff, and like, loincloths and spears, and it's like super racist and gross and disgusting. But they get to a certain part and the ride stops, and they go, and then there's this secret cave wall where they press a thing and it opens up, and there's something really cool about the idea that there's a secret lair that's like the atmosphere of it, right? It's this type of place that everyone's been before, and it's like, what if there was something sinister about it? And you get off in the middle of the ride, and there's the guard who's standing outside the whole time. Many episodes, there's a caveman with a stick standing there, and you're to think it's like a wax figure, but then you see his eyes move, and they allude to this over and over and over again just to have a payoff in like episode 10 where like he actually hits someone, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a cool, like, I don't know how to describe it. Like the vibe is very like cloak and dagger, soldiers and spies. If today there was some sort of like spy novel where there was a secret hideout inside of like Haunted Mansion, right? And like you know the secret handshake, and the button to press, and where to get off, and like it's really steeped in this like cool atmosphere. It's just really neat. No, and it sucks that it's so bound up in like super racist, like super awful.
Yeah.
You feel bad enjoying it.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. Like I was kind of thinking about this ahead of time, like recommend? No, don't recommend.
No, I wouldn't recommend it.
But I agree. There's some elements that are pretty cool. And like, I think the things I think of when you're talking about the where the hideout is hidden, like the entrance to the hideout is in the middle of an amusement park ride. Right.
It is.
It's like,
which is in the middle of town. It's very weird.
Yeah, like where do you expect like a hideout? Well, you think of like Frankenstein and how like, oh, you've probably got like a basement or a cave under a mansion, just like Batman does.
Yeah, exactly.
But you don't expect there to be like a basketball court in
Matterhorn?
Matterhorn. I was in my head. I was like the Matador.
Matterhorn.
Yeah, you don't expect that.
Yeah,
right. That's like one of the best secrets. Or like even Club 33 is like this big amusement
hidden
park,
in plain sight.
And then there's this one door that
you just gotta know where it is.
You just gotta know where it is, and you get in, you get all this special back access stuff. Like that kind of stuff is so cool. The hidden in plain sight stuff, not the obvious like man cave in your mansion kind of thing.
Well, I grew up on Scooby-Doo, right? And so there's a certain
I was
Scooby-Doo element.
Scooby-Doo too.
Yes.
Yes.
Like I remember playing the Scooby-Doo Super Nintendo game, where the first level you're at a circus, and yes, there's ghosts and stuff afoot, but your job is to figure out who's pretending to be a ghost, because almost always in Scooby-Doo they're not real, right?
Yeah.
It's someone who is using it as a distraction to like steal something, right? And there's something that's cool about the idea that about this place that's for happiness, this place that is for suspension of disbelief, for going to another world, and that there's actually a secret that's hiding amongst it. It's just a neat idea, and I would love if people kind of went back and tried something like this, maybe in a less problematic way. Because I think it's ground that we don't tread as much as we used to. So we've been talking about this radium gun.
Yeah.
This one broke my brain because I just didn't know the history. And maybe you know more, and I'm going to explain all this, and you're going to say, Alex, I knew all of this, and you're really dumb. The idea that like you're using a radioactive material for a weapon before the atomic bomb, which is 1945, blew my mind. I was like, that's a thing? People knew? People like were talking about this?
Yeah.
And the answer is like 100% yes, totally. Radium is discovered in December of 1898 by Pierre and Marie Curie. So Madame Curie, if you ever heard of her.
Yeah. She was crazy radioactive. Like they buried her in concrete.
Yes. Radium is it's a natural occurring element, and it is radioactive. Radioactivity is complicated, but essentially the smallest unit of matter that we have is an atom. An atom is made up of electrons that orbit around a nucleus, and the nucleus is made up of protons and neutrons. And the gist with protons and neutrons is that opposites attract. So protons to neutrons want to come together, and then opposites push apart. So protons to protons and neutrons to neutrons. So if you have two neutrons next to each other, they push away. So the attracting force is called nuclear force. The pushing away force is called static force. Most atoms are relatively balanced in their nuclear makeup. So your number of protons and number of neutrons and protons, they're not necessarily even, but they're arranged such that they're staying put, right?
They're balanced, yeah.
Yes. Radioactive atoms are ones that are out of balance. That's it. That's all it means, is that periodically neutrons or protons are ejected from the nucleus, right? Mm-hmm. So because they're unstable, they're shooting off these things into space, into the world. And those ejections are what we call radiation. So the nature of radiation can differ depending on, the nature of that ejection, but there's alpha, beta, and gamma radiation. Those are actual things, not just like Marvel comic books.
Right.
And they differ slightly in the way they act, but they all have two things in common. One is that it's free, naturally occurring energy, right? Think of fire that lasts an incredible amount of time, millions of years, and you don't have to light the fire. It's just going, right? So incredible amount of energy. And the second thing is that it's harmful to all biological life, right? So radiation's bad, right? Screws you up, kills cells.
I think there's probably some nitpicking here because radiation is like heat. Like you feel it. Like you feel the heat from the sun. That's radiation.
Sure.
That is not intrinsically bad, but there's like ionized radiation, which is the stuff that can, as it touches you, it can drop off an extra atom or an extra proton or electron, and then that changes the DNA structure of something, and that causes cancer or whatever. So like radiation by itself isn't necessarily bad, but it leads to bad things.
Yes. You might be asking yourself, if the protons and neutrons are getting ejected from the atom, does that make the atom become a different element? And the answer is yes, right? Because if you're changing what's in the nucleus, then it's no longer the same thing.
Yeah.
The elements change. So in some cases, radioactive elements turn into stable elements that are no longer radioactive. But often you go from one radioactive element to another. So for example, when radium ejects particles, it turns into radon gas. So like if you have radon gas in your house, if you've ever seen a white pipe upside the side of a house, that's a mitigation to make sure that like radon's not coming to your house. That's because like there's radium that's deep down in the ground beneath your house, right?
Mm-hmm. It's much more common in like the Midwest than I don't know exactly where the heat map is, but I know it was a big consideration in the Midwest when I lived there. So there would be like big basements, and then you would have like a random drain somewhere that like literally just like pumped out. And it was to pump air out, not to like water or anything. And it was just to make sure that the radium levels stay really low.
Or the radon, yeah.
Radon levels.
Nuclear power is driven basically by bombarding radioactive elements to force it to create radiation. So you're just making it do the radiation faster, right? And harvesting that radiation to make electricity. And a nuclear bomb, honestly, not that different, right? It just forces a chain reaction. So instead of like continually bombarding it, you do it once in a way that like is like starting a fire, right?
Yeah.
And the goal is to get it to release all the energy that's in there fast, right? You're doing it much quicker. Instead of over a million years, you do it in like a second, right?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I'm on one of those like government like blacklists or whatever.
So now all of you listening are on a watch list as well.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So I'm thinking to myself as I'm doing this research, wait a minute, nuclear bomb was created in secret, right? The American public and even Congress was unaware of the Manhattan Project. We didn't tell anybody, right? And the first atomic bombs were dropped in 1945. So how is this serial dealing with it? Well, radioactivity and the potential power is well understood long in advance, right? There's science fiction about nuclear weapons throughout the early 20th century. And in fact, the term atomic bomb was coined by H.G. Wells in a book called The World Set Free in 1915, right? So he creates the term atomic bomb. More practically, controlled fission, which we use for nuclear power plants, had already been achieved in the first time in 1935. So there are various ways that we use radioactivity. So there's like the science fiction, right? There's like the fact that people know of this immense potential energy. But there's actually like mundane ways that radioactive materials were used in advance. Like people were aware that they existed. So like radium, for example, glows in the dark. So it was really common to be used in like materials. Like if you had a watch that glowed in the dark, like today that's like light emissive. And at the time they just painted radium on it, so that you'd be able to see it any time of the day.
So like modern angle, you're used to like things that are lit up with batteries or like LED screens, like your Apple Watch or something like that. You're probably also familiar with like glow in the dark t-shirts or whatever, where like it has to be in light.
Yes, and then, to absorb energy.
And then you turn the lights off and then it glows in the dark for like a little while. And then it goes.
Yes.
Radium allowed things to just like glow all the time.
Forever. Yes. There's stuff that we had made like, for the World Wars that still glow.
Yeah. They had like clocks or like your speedometer. There's a whole bunch of stuff to like make Jeeps work at night well.
Yes.
Is that they did all those dials in radium. And there were these women who would paint them with these very fine paint and paintbrushes, and they would lick the paintbrush to like get it to a fine tip, and then they would dip and they would paint or whatever. And these like all these women,
they're called the Radium Girls.
Yeah.
They were told that it was safe. They would like do things like color it on their teeth. You know,
they were lied to.
Very famous. You'll hear that story talked about a lot. Unfortunately, what you won't hear a lot about is the Native Americans who mined the radium for us. That also befell similar fates as the Radium Girls. But
it's crazy time in history.
It is. You might have heard the period after World War II, 1950s and 1960s, described as the Atomic Age. Yeah. There's recent efforts by science fiction scholars to dub the 1910s through the 40s the Radium Age because of this stuff, because of science fiction at the time, because of things like the Batman serial that is like talking about like we could turn this into weapons, right? And people were really into radium. It's interesting to think, for me, that we actually tend to have a sense of what major technological advances are coming before they happen, right? I'm tempted to think, my natural state is thinking of invention as something that's happening sudden, right? And is novel, right? But it's usually not. Like we talked about it in episode 2, that the church, in the 1500s commissions the invention of the printing press. They know that is possible, right? Like it doesn't take a genius to know that like we've got these woodcut things and you could automate it somehow, right? So it's really about the method more than, idea, right? The idea is a dime a dozen. It's the process. And if you think about the current world, it seems to be that we're just on the cusp of a few things, like solid state batteries. We've been talking about that for a few decades, and like it seems like it's going to come mass market really soon.
Yeah.
Self-driving cars. We've been talking about superconductors, quantum computers, neural networks as a strategy for artificial general intelligence. Like we know that these technologies exist and they have a lot of promise, but they're not there, right?
Yeah.
But it makes sense, right? Like you start to get a handle on what the fundamental science is and what the building blocks and the stepping stones are, and it becomes less of a question of whether an advancement is going to happen, but when, right? And so I don't know. It's just a fun thing for me to think about, like coming to this realization that like this is super normal, and it's just not the way I thought about the 40s, right? Yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. I just kind of
yeah. So I, going back to like one of the earlier things you were saying about like what did we know about radiation and like the radium gun and stuff like that. When I was watching this, actually my mind went to, I just had to look up what it was called, but the Rutherford scattering experiments or the Rutherford gold foil experiment. So the idea was they had like some kind of radiation, if it was uranium or something else, they had that in a lead case that had a hole in it. And so that way they could project that radiation in a line, in a straight point direction. And then they put a very, very thin, it's like aluminum foil, but it was gold foil. And the idea was that, and then they surrounded that gold foil with some sort of reactive, kind of like Kodak film, but like some sort of a reactive film where they could aim those particles in. And then if all they got was particles on the backside, then they knew that the radiation just passed through anything. But it reflected off of other particles that were in the gold, and they picked up the radiation all the way around the circle. And that's how they proved something about how like particles work. And I think this like began like how particle accelerators work and whatnot, but like how things moved in that. And so that's what I thought of, because I've even when I was young, when I learned about like radiation and this idea that like lead protected you from radiation, that's why you wear like lead suits or whatever when you get x-rayed at
X-rays,
at anywhere really, but like most commonly at the dentist or something, is this idea that they like basically could make a radiation gun. And I remember thinking about this in like middle school or high school or something.
Sure.
And these guys, that's just what they did. They were taking that concept and they were just making it powerful to like a unrealistic extreme.
Yeah.
Where you could just like vaporize of like a concrete block. That's one of the first things they do is they like vaporize a concrete block or something.
He's doing it like a demonstration of the power or whatever.
And then they could just like pick up the chunks and just like crush them in their hands and stuff. So that's what I thought of right away. And that is dated to between 1906 and 1913. So that's like pre-World War I.
Totally.
Even. Yeah.
This is not anachronistic at all. It's just misaligned with the way I thought of this time period because I'm dumb. It's interesting to learn about.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the reason I'm saying that is I think a lot of people have like these major milestones in history. Like when was ancient Egypt? When was ancient Rome? Like
100%. Mine was the bomb, right?
Right.
And, like mine is like everything's after that, right? Because it was a secret. But that's not how it worked.
And so some of these are like the finer detail things that like are really interesting to help like orient you to like how technology changed throughout history and stuff. So
totally.
That's just like a little fun fact that like touches into how this radium gun worked.
Yeah. So I thought we could very quickly just speed run through some of the major actors and actresses in this. I have a couple facts and we can get your thoughts on the performance as we go.
Okay.
J. Carroll Nash is Dr. Daka. Do you have any thoughts about him?
He's just like, can I screen share?
Sure, if you want. There's a picture in the doc.
Oh, so you'll show that picture.
Yeah.
So the other picture that I am thinking of, I'll send you on iMessage.
Sounds good. What is this?
Do you know who that is?
No.
Okay. So that's a Nepal guy in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh no!
Right, and so it's the same kind of thing where they just like took some random white guy, and they did a bunch of makeup to give him like thinner like slits for eyes or like change the eyelids or whatever. And they're like, look, suddenly they're a different race, and so I think this guy's claim to fame was that he knew a lot of different dialects.
Yeah, so he's an Irish guy.
Okay.
And he's quote unquote a dialect specialist. He played Italian, Eastern European, Latin American, Native American, Middle Eastern, Asian, Pacific Islander, even African American.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Oh man. But in the 40s, like that's his. So like, were the dialects like good, or were they like extremely racist? Right?
Yes.
Like.
Wikipedia quotes the Washington Post as calling him quote Hollywood's one man UN.
Oh my gosh.
He was personally nominated twice for Oscars for Best Supporting Role, won a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Role, and appeared in 4 movies that were nominated for Best Picture Oscars. And so he was acting from the 30s all the way until the 1970s. This guy was a movie star.
Wow.
For this kind of thing. There was one article that I found that contemporaneous that said that one of the reasons he was particularly well suited to these was because of his quote swarthy appearance. Oof. So he kind of wasn't pale white, and so he was close enough. They could tip him over the edge.
Dang.
To make his skin match various races.
That's pretty rough.
Yeah, it's bad, man.
Well, yeah, it's also like, is he really good at dialects at all, or is he just like? I have
no idea.
Because like, if he's like, no, my dialects are so good as long as the makeup's good, right? Like, I can fool you if I kind of sort of look the part on like fuzzy screens.
A foreign sounding voice, right? Like he was doing a voice. It's like a cartoon character.
I can do crappy voices too, though.
Yeah. Any more thoughts on him before we move on?
I mean, he was probably a really nice guy at the time. Like, I don't want to like shit on him too hard. It's just things of the time and like how they like haven't aged super well, you know.
Yeah.
And it's a bummer that he was nominated for 2 different Oscars and didn't get them. But
yeah. Lewis Wilson, Batman.
Not good.
Yeah.
He like didn't seem like Batman, and he also didn't seem like Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
There was like absolutely no difference in his voice from one side of that to the other.
Yeah. Costume wasn't doing him any favors.
And because it was like skin tight. Like there was nothing there till I was like, it was like pajamas, right?
Yeah, it's not armor.
And no,
it looks like it's made of wool, maybe, you know.
And then I think I'm guessing they had stunt doubles at this time,
I have no idea. Yeah.
Anyway, every time he got in a fight, it just looked like a rich guy in pajamas getting the snot beaten out of him. Right? It's not a very good Batman.
Yeah.
But had like some of those like classic 1940s like over the top laughs and stuff like that you would expect from that. But like, not great. Not a big fan.
Yeah. Lewis Wilson only appeared in 13 movies. Most of them were uncredited. So he was only active in the industry from 1943 to 1954, and Batman is easily his most famous role. So not a big movie star. He did live to be 80 years old. Died in the year 2000.
Crazy.
So he lived to see, Batman 89. He lived to see Batman forever.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Wow. Douglas Croft as Robin. Any thoughts?
I thought he largely was okay, but his Robin costume was pretty terrible. Yeah,
the costumes were not doing them any favors. I would go so far as to say the Robin costume is better than the Batman costume, but that's not saying much.
No, it's not.
Douglas Croft was just 16 years old. He is still, to this day, the youngest actor to have played Robin in live action.
Wow.
He only appeared in 12 movies, mostly as a child, and we don't know much about him, to be honest with you. We know he was buried in a military graveyard, and his gravestone says that he served in the army during World War II, but it's unclear exactly when that happened because he was filming movies through most of that time. So I don't know what that means, but
I think there are a lot of people that worked for the army but never went overseas. Like they had to do a lot of work domestically. So it could have been something like that.
Possible. Or he had a brief tour. Like people would go depending on like what was asked of them for, 6 months and then come back or. He died at only age 37. It was kind of a tragic death. People out there, I don't want to go into too much detail, but like, a death of despair for sure. People speculate because his career kind of evaporated and didn't really have much prospects after his acting.
That's a bummer.
Shirley Patterson as Linda Page.
I think she was fine.
Yeah. I thought she did great. She appeared in over 40 films, mostly B movies. So she's not a big star, but she had a successful career.
Yeah, I would have guessed that.
Best known for Batman, although she appeared briefly in a Three Stooges film. If you search, YouTube, you search Linda Page, she's in like 30 seconds of a Three Stooges skit.
That's funny. You mean Shirley Patterson or Linda Page?
Yes, Shirley Patterson.
Okay.
My bad. She also had a long life, lived from 1922 all the way until 1995. I will say, while we're talking about her, I think it's pretty clear to me that she's meant to be Julie Madison. I don't know why they changed her name to Linda Page, but it is the fiance character in that time period.
I guess I felt that way watching the show, but I didn't know she was a fiance. I thought she was just a girlfriend. But even just the way she dressed and the way her hair was and stuff reminded me of Julie Madison.
Yeah. William Austin is Alfred Beagle.
I thought he did a great job. Honestly, the character was kind of goofy and but like I thought that he matched it and he handed up.
He was nailing the assignment.
Yeah, I thought he did a really good job.
He appeared in over 92 movies. So this is one of the most famous people in the movie, starting in 1920 at the very beginning of the Silent Age and going all the way until 1947. So a very dense career, not particularly long. He's best known for a supporting actor role in a Clara Bow film called It. I don't really know anything about it, but it's a very famous film, supposedly one of the most famous of the silent era. And he appeared in 2 Laurel and Hardy movies, which is also kind of a big deal.
That's pretty big, yeah.
As a supporting actor, one called Duck Soup and one called County Hospital. So he was kind of a big deal during this period. Kind of the elder statesman of the cast.
That's really cool.
Absent from the movie, no Gordon.
Yep.
No Vicky Vale. I'm to understand both of those appear in the 1949 serial. So if we ever decide to come back around and watch some more.
And that's the Batman and Robin. It's called something like Batman and Robin, right? And
different actors, different take. Although they did try to have some continuity. Like the Robin has like curly short hair to look like Douglas Croft in the 1949 version. That's all my notes, man. What did you think about this movie? What are things you want to talk about?
I have additional notes, actually. Let's do it. There's some like crazy spy stuff. So there's this one point where they're like, it's all showing the technology and stuff. And there's this like coffin that shows up. They open it up. They're like, oh, there's a dead body in here. And Dr. Daka is like, but I have technology and I will bring him back to life. Only long enough for him to share his secret message with me. It's like,
he wasn't dead. He was only mostly dead.
Yes, mostly dead.
True
That's right.
love.
To Blaze. And And yeah, so they bring him back to life for like 20 seconds or something. He says a message, and then someone's like, well, that wasn't a very long message. And he's like, and Dr. Duck is like, yeah, we're supposed to be able to figure out the rest. He got me the important part. And it's like, what a completely awful, like inefficient way to send a secret message. Like just big, heavy, like, and you can't get much of a message through.
No,
but
it's a little dumb.
And then someone dies. Like it's just like all the way across is bad. That was kind of funny.
I don't know if it was meant to be a play on Kamikaze or not, but there's a lot of like.
They did make a reference to that.
Yeah. He's what donated is the wrong word. Sacrificed his life for the cause of Emperor Hirohito or whatever. Yeah.
So when he dies, Dr. Daka does say something about like, and now he will go on in peace, knowing that he served as emperor or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
They kept making these references, like semi-subtle, but not that subtle, to like the axes of evil, which I thought was kind of interesting. There were a bunch of things throughout the storytelling where like the Americans were like super patriotic and they were going to be interrogated, but like to a person, they were like, no, I won't tell you the thing that you need to know. Uncle Sam is stronger than that. Like we Americans, we're too strong for that. And it like it was kind of like propaganda to like
100% is propaganda,
to convince the audience, like if you're ever in this situation, you have to be strong like these guys too, like because we're all too good to be dropping
loose
secrets off
ships.
Exactly. There is this point where they shoot down a plane that Batman is in.
Yeah,
I thought it was very funny.
Parachutes out.
Yes, and I thought it was super funny that there's this point where these two guys that were the pilots are in the back fighting Batman. There's no autopilot, so it's just kind of flying in a straight line and kind of like wavering a little bit because no one's flying it. Yeah. And the army is like, we got to shoot that plane down. And they like struggle to shoot down a plane that's flying in a straight line. That was really funny to me.
Well, and what gets me right is that Batman was sent to intercept the plane by the army. Right. Or someone, the Pentagon, right? They send him a letter. There's this whole scene where he's like turning ink visible so they can get and they know he's on the plane. Yes. And they decide to shoot it down anyway. And it's like, why did you send him if you could shoot it down? And then once you send him, why did you try to shoot it down? One of the other guys, pick a lane.
Exactly. Yeah. My very next note is Batman tells Robin that he's going to follow it to the hideout. Robin tells the army shoots the plane down anyway. And then I was so sick of the music because it's just like the same like 2 or 3 songs over and over again. Yeah. Like anytime there was a fight scene, it had like the same like dun 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 dun.
Yeah. I will say
over and over and over.
If you decide to watch this show, don't binge it. There is on YouTube. I made the mistake the first time I watched this. There's a movie cut. Right, it's where someone has gone and cut it together into like a 3-hour-long movie. Don't do that. It's not a good idea. This is a serial. It is meant to be watched episodically. If you can watch one a night or one a week and do it over a longer period of time, you will enjoy it significantly more than if you try to binge it. It is not made to be binged.
I totally agree. But also the one caveat is you got to pay close attention because it's crazy convoluted and you'll like lose track of the plot. Like it's something else. I was kind of looking around the internet and I did see like a couple of things that like the critical reception was like not good because they were like, even for convoluted movies, this is like really convoluted. And
to be honest, it's not that
in
different
line with the issues.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not that different from comic books. The key to enjoying something like this is to turn your brain off a little bit. You need to have you need to pay close attention within the episode so you can tell why they're doing what they're doing in the current episode, but do not try to remember and like draw a straight line from what happened in the previous one to what happened in the next. It is true that it ends in a cliffhanger and the next one picks up at the very next moment, but there's only like 1 or 2 episode arcs. Truly, most of them, the story is completely self-contained into a single episode. And so, if you're trying to remember the characters or you're trying to remember what's going on, it's just super not worth it. You're going to have a much better time if you just like go with the flow. Like, oh, he's trying to get radium again. I wonder how they're going to stop him this time. Right. Mm-hmm. That's how to enjoy something like this.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important element of this is like really set your expectations.
Yes.
for the type of entertainment that this is.
Yeah.
I did have a thought a couple of times
Yeah.
that they were probably driving you crazy specifically, because I know you dissect movies a lot, and like the cinematography and like the soundtrack and like Chekhov's gun and like the like proper way to like do script writing and stuff.
Yeah.
And this was like pretty far from all of that stuff. It predates a lot of the existence of those storytelling mechanisms. For film, to
some degree,
to an extent. Yeah, but was it okay, or was it driving you bananas?
To be honest, like comparing this to a lot of the other early cinema that I have consumed for the show, like The Man Who Laughs and the what's the Bat movie? The Bat and the Bat Whispers.
Bat Whispers.
This is better. Like this is pretty good.
Oh yeah, this is way more entertaining than those. Easier to follow.
Has a higher budget, better directed, better put together. The writing's not too bad. Like they even do like foreshadowing and callbacks, like what I was talking about earlier, where they are doing the virtue sort of display for Bruce with the Native American. They are trying to do things, right? It is not thoughtless. I think it's a little ham-fisted, especially in the current context, because they're trying to do things that we wouldn't appreciate. Right? Like you don't have a lot of patience for something that is a propaganda film, right? This is all about patriotism. It's all about pro-America, anti-Japan. I think, I wonder if people kind of forgot what they knew about Batman and like pretended this was a James Bond movie instead, if they might enjoy it a little bit more, because this is not about a crime fighter. This is about a spy.
Yeah. Not a detective, a spy.
No,
right?
He's a spy. And honestly, the fact that he's wearing a getup is not super important. He could be wearing a suit for most of this and it would be fine. And so I think understanding that context, you're going to be a lot better prepared to enjoy it. Like if you can say, I'm not going to let the racist stuff bother me. I'm not going to let the war propaganda bother me. I'm going to appreciate this for what they're trying to do, which is a spy film. Then I think there's some there for sure. I don't recommend it.
Yeah. Well, lots of like historical pop culture as well. Like this is like when I watch Batman the Animated Series, for example, like it's a 1990s take on what like the 30s were like in that technology and stuff. So they're wearing fedoras and stuff. But this was a time when they really did, like everyone all the time, like that was normal. The people sitting in the audience watching it were like, this is normal. Right. Yeah. And so like there is something there from like a sociological level, maybe that is like pretty interesting to watch. It was cool to me, like watching all the old cars, because I do kind of have that thought of like when I watch something of the time and you're like, oh, these aren't set pieces. This is just like the world.
Yes.
They're all old cars, you know?
Totally.
But then also they wreck a car. They were two different cars, I think.
Sure.
And I wonder how much that cost, because cars weren't cheap, you know. Especially,
I think this was fairly expensive. So. Like they had some budget for this for sure.
Yeah.
They built sets. You know. Yeah. They had special effects.
And it's some pretty decent special effects for the time, right? Especially like the radium gun. I thought that stuff turned out like pretty respectably for the time.
Agreed.
And then I did want to jump over to two other really quick things. One, this is kind of interesting. It's on the Wikipedia, but you can see the length of the film in feet for every episode, which I thought was pretty cool. So the longest episode is the first episode. It's 27 minutes long, 26.9 minutes long.
Yeah.
How many feet do you think that was for film?
Okay. Hold on. 3,615,000 feet.
I think you multiplied and you should have divided.
3,530.
Much closer.
Swish.
I knew you were going to be, and I think I know your actual mistake.
Okay.
It's 18 frames a second, right?
18 was silent films.
Oh, okay.
Let me punch it in to see what happens.
Yeah.
2,647.
Super close. It's 2,423 feet of film.
Okay. I bet their calculation is wrong because this was definitely 24 frames per second. But regardless,
I mean, we estimated the millimeters in an inch, so like
yeah. That's true.
So that I thought that was kind of interesting because that's like 24 football fields. No, that's not that's too many.
No, how many feet are in a yard? 3 feet in a yard.
So you
got to divide the whole thing by 3 again.
So it's 8 football fields.
Yeah.
That should have been really easy, but
no, it's
yeah.
okay. It's big. It's long.
The nerves of having a microphone. You can't do math. So
I had to get out Solver to do it. So
so another thing that I thought was really interesting was the release to home media.
Yeah.
They released this sucker on DVD.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
That's so wild to me because
you can buy it on Amazon.
Yeah. But like culturally, this seems kind of like Songs of the South, where like they were just gonna like burn all copies of it and like
that's a Disney thing.
I know it's a Disney thing, but like
you know, Warner actually I think is the best at this. They put stuff on HBO. It just has a warning. It'll say like this was wrong then, it's wrong now. But like
Disney does
we
that
did
too
it.
Now.
We're not trying to hide it. I mean, you still can't watch Songs of the South.
That's right.
I mean, they should. In my opinion, it's better to acknowledge that it was wrong than to pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not a big fan of like revisionist history, but I am kind of surprised that they were trying to make money off of this in the DVD format.
Well, I don't think Warner Brothers
like the 2000s.
It's Columbia.
2014.
Yeah. I would love if they did a Blu-ray of this. I would buy it.
100%. I actually started watching a 4K colorized
upscale
version of this on YouTube. It's not very good. I'll warn you of that.
Someone did it. A fan did it.
They colorized it through some sort of algorithm by frame. Yeah. And so there's like some sections where it's like a strobe light of the rainbow because it's like the background color is changing a lot. It's like blah, 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 blah. It's like
guessing because it can't know. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's
pretty good at getting skin tones, you know.
It's like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Yes,
like,
it is.
You know, there's like some crazy colors.
Do not recommend it. Watch it in black and white.
Blasting you. Yeah, I don't recommend that. It was kind of interesting to see what the adjustments were to like try and crisp things up and whatnot. But no, it wasn't easier to watch.
No, I want them to go back and scan it again. Like I would hope that there's original negatives around somewhere. But
I'm trying to think if there's anything else kind of fun that I ran across. But Dr. Daka does reappear in other stuff. I don't know if you ran across that.
I didn't know that. Spoilers.
Yeah, so Prince Daka appears in the All-Star Squadron in 1985 issues.
Whoa!
He's the leader of several Japanese super operatives.
There you go. You had mentioned that he was a prince, and I was like, I don't know if I remember that.
Yeah. I remember they said something about Prince. It didn't stick very well, though, but yeah.
Sure. Crazy. Well, I'm sure we'll call back to it then.
Yeah. I mean, in like 5 years when we get to the 80s. But yeah.
The 80s, yeah. Hey, Bat Family, if you made it this far, I know you liked the episode, so do yourself a favor, subscribe, you won't miss any more videos, give it a like, leave a comment down below, tell us what we got wrong, and to keep the Batman history train going, watch this video next.